Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. A US envoy denied Hamas had agreed to his ceasefire proposal. Contradiction. A Palestinian official who said Hamas accepted a plan involving 10 hostages and a 70-day truce. Israel dismissed the deal as unacceptable, while far-right marches clashed with Palestinians during Jerusalem Day events. The US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation announced it had begun aid operations in Gaza, a day after its director resigned, citing principal concerns. John Acre was named an interim executive director as the group started delivering food amid a nearly 3-month blockade. Russia says it shot down 99 Ukrainian drones on May 27th as strikes escalate across border areas. Zelensky calls Russian attacks brazen and large-scale, while Putin threatens to throttle Western companies still operating in Russia. Car ploughs into Liverpool fans during title parade. Nearly 50 people are injured. 27 are hospitalized, 2 are in critical condition. Police rule out terrorism. PM Starmer commented the scenes as appalling. Israeli military says it intercepted a missile and a projectile fired from Yemen today. As Houthi forces continue attacks in solidarity with Gaza, Israel has responded to earlier strikes with a May 6th airstrike on Sana'a airport that has killed several people. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has called for stronger trade ties with Malaysia amid his visit for the ASEAN talks in Southeast Asia. Malaysia praised progress on Myanmar, while the Philippines said it remains open to deals with China to ease the South China Sea tensions. King Charles has arrived in Canada for a historic 2-day visit amid Trump's annexation talk. The monarch is open to Parliament on Tuesday, first royal to do so in 68 years, days after PM Carney rejects US statehood push. Washington has dismissed claims by Hamas that it agreed to a new ceasefire deal in Gaza. The group said it accepted a proposal from US envoy Steve Witkoff involving a 70-day truce and the release of 10 Israeli hostages. But Witkoff called Hamas' response disappointing and completely unacceptable, adding that the group had not agreed to his actual terms. Israel too rejected the plan, stating no responsible government could agree to the conditions amid stalled negotiations. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to recover all hostages from Gaza, both living and dead, vowing to, "We are not giving up." Let's listen in to the Israeli Prime Minister.
ויש קשיים. החמאס עיקש, הוא סרבן, כך אמר גם הנציג האמריקני הערב, ויטקוף, זה נכון. אנחנו לא מרפים מהמשימה. אנחנו החזרנו עד היום 148 חטופים חיים. ויש עוד 20 בוודאות שהם חיים. ויש גם אחרים שאינם בחיים. ואנחנו מתכוונים להחזיר את כולם. אז, כך היום, נכריע את מבקשי נפשנו, נשיב את כל חטופינו, נוודא שעזה לא תהווה איום על ישראל.
Tensions continue to rise in Jerusalem as far-right Israelis chanted "Death to Arabs" and clashed with Palestinians during the annual Jerusalem Day parade. Opposition leader Yair Lapid condemned this event as a festival of hatred and racism. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a new Swiss-based non-profit, said it has begun distributing food to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and appointed a new executive director following earlier setbacks. This comes after the rollout of the US-Israel-backed aid plan was delayed due to Jake Wood resigning. The executive director of GHF stepped down after reports in several news outlets raised questions about the group's independence and its connections with Israel. Wood also stated that the operation could not fulfill its mission in a way that adhered to humanitarian principles. GHF has said that John Ekre will succeed Wood on an interim basis. According to reports, Palestinians have already received aid packages. GHF has said that in a statement that more trucks with aid will be delivered and the full flow of aid will increase each day. The GHF is taking over the handling of aid despite objections from the United Nations. The desperately needed supplies reportedly started flowing on a day that saw Israeli strikes kill at least 52 people in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel's military has announced that it had intercepted a missile and a projectile launched from Yemen towards Israel. With sirens sounding in several areas, the Iran-aligned Houthi rebels in Yemen have continued to fire missiles at Israel, claiming it is in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Russian Defense Ministry says its forces have downed 99 Ukrainian drones overnight. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Russian strikes are becoming increasingly brazen and large-scale, with over 900 drones and missiles launched on Ukraine in just 3 days. Zelensky also called the attacks a political choice by Putin, not a military necessity, and urged the world to ramp up pressure on Russia to force it towards peace. Listen in.
Російські удари щоночі стають все більш зухвалими та масштабними. Більш ніж 900 ударних дронів проти України за 3 дні. Плюс балістика. Плюс крилаті ракети. В цьому немає жодного військового сенсу. Але це очевидний політичний вибір. Вибір Путіна, вибір Росії, вибір воювати далі та руйнувати життя.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to throttle Western companies still operating in Russia if they act against the country's interests, calling for a mirror response to restricted services from firms like Zoom and Microsoft. Let's take a listen.
Надо их душить. Согласен полностью. Говорю без всякого стеснения. Потому что они нас пытаются душить, надо отвечать им взаимностью. Вот и все. Мы никого не выгоняли, никому не мешали. Мы предоставляли максимально благоприятные условия для работы у нас, на нашем рынке. А они пытаются нас душить. Вот коллега же говорил. И нужно отвечать им взаимностью, зеркально действовать.
Speaking at a meeting with entrepreneurs, Putin said Western companies had been given favorable conditions in Russia, but were now trying to throttle the country. He added that Russia would not welcome back companies like McDonald's, which left the country after Moscow launched its military offensive on Ukraine. Putin's comments come amid growing speculation that some U.S. firms may be considering a return, in the light of U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to reset relations with Russia. However, so far, no major Western company has publicly confirmed plans to return. We have Andrew Laham, Professor of International Relations at Macalester College, joining us from Minnesota, USA. Thank you for joining us. Professor, how do you view the escalation in drone and missile strikes between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it's a classic sword and shield dynamic. You develop an offensive weapon, then the other side develops a defense, and then you work around that. The Russians right now, with their Iskander missiles, drones, and their ballistic missiles are simply, in this part of the cycle, they're simply overwhelming the Ukrainians. Having said that, just remind everybody that we're talking about, with these strikes, casualties and deaths in the dozens compared to World War II, the bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Coventry, Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the scores of thousands of dead. I think we just need to bear that in mind, that the escalation in terms of, right now in the cycle, in terms of Russia's ability to strike Kyiv and Ukrainians' ability to strike Moscow, frankly, is trivial, except for the families that are affected.
And it leads me to ask, do you think the international community is doing enough to respond to this escalation?
I would be hard-pressed to say that the international community is doing anything. President Trump is kind of walking away from this. He's very mercurial, as you know. The Europeans are irrelevant in terms of this, where we are in this cycle of offense and defense and drone attacks and whatnot. And you'd be hard-pressed to find any country in Africa that could care less, in Latin America that could care less. It's just not, this conflict is not on everybody's radar in the way it is in some parts of the Western world.
And building on that point that no country is doing enough, in your opinion, what role could diplomacy play in de-escalating this conflict?
Not very much, and here's why. Fundamentally, the Ukrainians under Zelensky are desperate for a ceasefire and some kind of peace because they're losing the war. On the other hand, Russia under Putin is winning the war, and they have no incentive whatsoever to end this anytime soon. Once the Russians conquer those 4 oblasts, the parts of Ukraine that they claim are Russian, with some justification, by the way, I think President Putin will draw a line under it and declare victory, and that will be the end of it. But until that happens, there's no prospect. President Trump can't broker a peace. Ursula von der Leyen can't usher in a peace. There's no peace to be had until Putin gets what he wants, which is not all of Ukraine, and it's not conquering all of Europe. He wants those 4 provinces, those 4 oblasts, to be incorporated practically and legally into the Russian Federation. Once he achieves that, the war's over. Until he achieves that, the war continues.
And speaking of Putin, what message do you think President Putin is sending by threatening Western companies?
Well, it's a counterstrike. There's been talk in the US and Europe about heightening or intensifying or amplifying the sanctions against Russia. And I think this is just simply a reflexive response. You threaten us with this, we'll threaten you with that. And I think that's all it boils down to. I don't think it matters at the end of the day. Either way, there's not much more the West can do to sanction Russia, and there's not much more Russia can do to kind of sanction the West. It's a bit of bloviating, to be honest.
And to sum up what you just said, how might these threats against Western firms affect international business in Russia?
Well, there isn't much Western international business in Russia. McDonald's has been, nationalized, etc. It's not going to affect Chinese trade with Russia. It's not going to affect Indian trade with Russia. And those are 2 pretty big markets and 2 pretty big sources of income. The Indians are loving the discounted oil, and the Chinese are loving the discounted cost of potash and other kind of critical minerals, if I can put it that way. I just don't see these noises that the West is making affecting the outcome of this conflict at all.
And it leads me to ask, how do you see the relationship between Russia and the West evolving in these coming months?
You know, that's a very interesting question. And President Trump, as you know, changes his mind from hour to hour. But if I were to sort of detect a through line here, it would be this, that the US wants to disengage from Europe. It wants, so that's point A, because it wants to focus on the Indo-Pacific. B, in a related sense, what I think President Trump wants is to find a way to sever the increasingly tight relationship between Russia and China. It's kind of the reverse Nixon thing from 1972, where Nixon went to China to sever its relationship with Russia. I think he's working now to partner with Russia to sever the relationship with China. Will it work? I have no idea. My gut is telling me it's not going to work, but I've been wrong before. But I think that's the dynamic at play here. On the one hand, disengaging from Europe to focus on the Indo-Pacific, and on the other hand, trying to sever the relationship or mitigate or undermine or fracture the relationship between Russia and China. That's what I think is going on here.
And from your point of view, what is the U.S. strategy now that more pressure or more diplomacy?
That changes from hour to hour under this president, as I'm sure you and your viewers know. Right now, at this particular moment, I think this administration has decided to put more pressure on Russia. And how did they do that? Well, they threatened the sanctions to be amplified, but they also are threatening, if I can use that word, to provide Ukraine with more weapons and more ammunition. And by the way, the United States doesn't have more weapons and more ammunition. The defense industrial base in this country is pretty much fully extended. There's not much more they can give. And what the U.S. has been giving them, the Patriot missile system, for example, the Russians have figured out a way to use their drones so that the Patriot anti-missile, anti-aircraft system doesn't work against Russia anymore. If I were in the Kremlin, if I were Vladimir Putin, and thank God I'm not, but if I were, I wouldn't be at all intimidated or bullied or influenced by anything that the White House, any statements that the White House is issuing, and any policy changes that the White House is initiating.
Right.
He's fully committed to winning this war, which is a limited war, which has limited objectives, and there's nothing on God's green earth that's going to deter him from pursuing that.
And
certainly nothing. Sorry, go ahead.
Since you have kind of already mentioned that U.S. has exhausted their resources in trying to stop this war, how are EU sanctions complicating any possibility of negotiations?
Well, at the point of being rude, and I try not to be, the EU is utterly irrelevant.
Well,
they've already sanctioned Russia as much as they're going to sanction Russia. There's nothing left there. There's nothing left in terms of military resources amongst the European Union members, with the exception of Poland, which is actually pulling its weight. And there's not much in the way of diplomatic, economic, or military resources that the European Union has to offer Ukraine. I think the European Union is, in all three realms, economics, military, diplomatic, utterly irrelevant.
Thank you very much, Professor Latham, for joining us today and sharing that insight. We move on now to our next story. A car ploughed into a crowd of Liverpool fans during celebrations marking the club's Premier League title, leaving 27 people hospitalized, including 2 who are in serious conditions. Police say the incident, which occurred just minutes after the team's bus had passed through the city center, is not being treated as terrorism. The driver, identified as a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area, has been arrested. Officers described the collision as an isolated incident and confirmed that they are not looking for any other suspects. Let's listen in.
That people will understandably be concerned by what has happened tonight. What I can tell you is that we believe this to be an isolated incident, and we are not currently looking for anyone else in relation to it. The incident is not being treated as... The car stopped at the scene and a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area was arrested. We believe him to be the driver of the vehicle. Extensive inquiries are ongoing to establish the circumstances leading...
4 children were among those taken to hospital. Emergency crews had to free at least 4 people trapped under the vehicle. Let's listen in.
Sadly, 4 of the injured were children who were enjoying the day with their friends and their families. We can confirm that our teams treated 20 patients at the scene for minor injuries, and these did not need hospital treatment. 27 patients in total were taken to hospital by ambulance, and we believe 2 of those, including one of the children, have sustained serious injuries.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called the scenes in Liverpool appalling and said his thoughts were with the victims and their families. Liverpool Fan Club issued a statement expressing solidarity with those affected. The incident came on a spring bank holiday with hundreds of thousands gathered to celebrate the team's first title parade since the COVID-era trophy win in 2020, when public festivities were all banned. A holiday gathering turned tragic in Philadelphia Monday night as a mass shooting in Fairmount Park left 2 people dead, at least 8 others injured. Police say the shooting occurred in night near Lemon Hill Drive and a popular drive, an area crowded earlier in the day for Memorial Day cookouts. Among the victims, at least 2 are believed to be juveniles. Authorities have not yet released the ages of those killed, nor have they confirmed if any suspects are in custody. Aerial footage captured by Chopper 6 showed a heavy police presence as officers cordoned off the area and launched an investigation. The shooting comes just 1 day after a separate incident in South Carolina left 10 people injured during a fight on a private boat. While no deaths were reported in that case, several victims remain in critical condition. Now we move on to Asia. Chinese public security authorities in the city of Guangzhou have attributed a cyber attack on an unnamed technology company to the Taiwan government, according to a statement. Based on an initial police investigation, authorities in the capital of Guangdong province have claimed that the foreign hacker organization behind the attack was supported by Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party. The Mainland Affairs Council in Taiwan reportedly has not commented on the claim. Leaders from the Gulf Cooperation Council and ASEAN have gathered in Kuala Lumpur for their second high-level summit, signaling deeper ties between the Middle East and Southeast Asia. The meeting also marks the inaugural trilateral summit between ASEAN, the GCC and China, as global alliances shift in today's unpredictable geopolitical landscape. Kuwait's Crown Prince, who chairs the GCC, projected that two-way trade with ASEAN could hit $180 billion by 2032, up from over $130 billion last year. He also emphasized cooperation on clean energy, digital transformation, and regional security. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, speaking as ASEAN chair, hailed the summit as exceptional and called for a greater collaboration rooted in trust and shared values. Both leaders voiced strong support for Palestinian rights and a peaceful resolution in Gaza. The summit coincides with ASEAN's adoption of the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on ASEAN 2045, a 20-year strategic roadmap focused on sustainable growth, digitalization, and regional resilience. Let's listen in to other statements made by the Malaysian Prime Minister during the second day of this summit.
We renew that solemn promise, not as a tribute to the past, but as a living covenant with the future. It is often said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. That is why ASEAN has sought to do, through decades of steady effort, shared stewardship, and strategic vision. The future we seek must rest on foundations of sustainability and inclusion. ASEAN's integration must be genuinely people-centered. That means closing development gaps, raising the standards of living, and investing in the human spirit and potential of all our citizens.
King Charles has touched down in Ottawa for a highly symbolic visit to reinforce support for Canada amid growing pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who has publicly expressed a desire to annex the country. The monarch, accompanied by Queen Camilla, has received by Prime Minister Mark Carney and Governor General Mary Simon on the tarmac. Charles is set to open Parliament on Tuesday, the first time a British monarch has done so in Canada since Queen Elizabeth 68 years ago. The visit marks King Charles' first to the country since ascending to the throne in 2022 and comes amid his ongoing cancer treatment. He also participated in public events, including a tree planting ceremony in Ottawa. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to redirect $3 billion in federal grants from Harvard University to trade schools across the country, accusing the Ivy League of anti-Semitism and ties to the Chinese Communist Party. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said the move would be a great investment for America. The administration has frozen Harvard's federal funding, moved to revoke its ability to enroll foreign students, and threatened its tax-exempt status as well, prompting Harvard to sue citing First Amendment violation. The all-party delegation led by Indian Member of Parliament Supriya Sule has concluded their visit to Qatar, which was the first country in the leg of the four-nation visit of the delegation. In Doha, the delegation members held fruitful interactions with Qatari dignitaries at the Shura Council and the government of Qatar. After concluding their Qatar visit, the Group 7 MPs left from Doha for Johannesburg, South Africa. Meanwhile, the all-party delegation led by Indian Member of Parliament Ravi Shankar Prasad has met various French leaders and think tanks to convoy India's strong and united stance against terrorism. The all-party delegation led by Prasad conveyed the message that the terrorist attack in Pahalgam last month was a deliberate attempt to undermine peace and development in the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Prasad also exhorted members of the Indian community in France to make every effort to showcase India as a beacon of peace against terrorism. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.